Psalm 23:5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows.
Okay, here's my question. What's your favorite piece of furniture? I'm really glad that those plans to build an IKEA in Nashville fell through because Leslie would have wanted to go there a lot. And there's not a lot of marriages that are really strong enough to sustain building IKEA furniture together on a regular basis. We've got a solid relationship, but those are trials and temptations that are dark and deep. There's only so many things you can do with a hex wrench, an Allen key, and I'm not sure, but I think the kids might have learned some new words the last time we tried to build some furniture. So we try to be careful of that. What's your favorite piece of furniture? I know. I'm preaching, so most of you are thinking about going to bed. The bed, and our kids are at Nana and Papa Mike's today. I'm taking a Sunday afternoon nap. This is going to be amazing. I'm excited. Beds are nice. I like beds. I've slept in tents. I've slept in hammocks. I've slept on the ground. I've slept in cars. But beds are great. They're not the only thing, though. Jim Gray told me one time, he said, I've got some mechanic work to perform this afternoon. I got to put a rear end in a recliner. So, that's a pretty special thing that you could do sometimes. I have a lot of cool memories of my mom's parents, and they each had their recliner, and it was kind of their home turf. That's where they lived. And I remember sitting on that recliner with them, eating candy and hearing stories and watching TV and all that sort of stuff. If I asked Abel this question, Abel would tell me that his favorite piece of furniture is my gray couch that he basically lived on. There is an Abel-shaped divot on this piece of furniture from the time that he lived with us for the last few years. Maybe you have something else that has some sentimental attachments, like a jewelry box or a hope chest. Remember one time John Gabriel had bought hope chests to build for all of his girls. And I guess they shipped one too many, and they just said, you can keep the last one. So he put the last one, this is a true story, on Facebook Marketplace just to sell because he didn't need it. But he put pictures of what it looked like when he had finished it. So I'm scrolling Facebook one day, and there's Savannah Gabriel's hope chest for sale on the internet. I thought he'd gotten tired of his daughter and was just giving up hope on you, Savannah. I saw that every time I saw it. She just said, so did I think. So, wow, I guess she got in a lot of trouble. But I really do believe that God has a favorite piece of furniture. And you listen to the song, so you probably know what it is. I believe that God's favorite piece of furniture is a table. Now, I don't have a verse that says God's favorite piece of furniture is a table. But let me make a case for you. Can I do this? This is a little weird, but I want you to stick with me. In the Old Testament, God spent a lot of time and a lot of energy talking to his people about a specific table. It's the table of showbread, or that's not my favorite name for it. It's the table of the bread of the presence. It's a pretty cool name, I think. It's discussed in Exodus 25, Numbers 4, 1 Kings 7. There are a lot of verses in the Old Testament describing its construction, how it was made, what was done with it. It's placed right in front of the veil between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. It's right there, next to where God is believed to be. It's not a huge, fancy, ornate piece in a lot of ways. It's about 1.5 feet wide by 3 foot long by 27 inches tall. It's an end table. Maybe a bedside table, maybe a coffee table, if you want to think of it that way. It's made out of acacia wood. It's a wood that doesn't seem like a whole lot. It's almost a scrub brush in warm climates. It's common not only in the Sinai Peninsula, but in the Hawaiian Islands. It's common in the Philippines. It's actually more durable than oak or hickory. It's a strong wood, which you wouldn't think from looking at this nasty brush of a tree. The Hawaiians use it to make ukuleles. The Filipinos use it to make boats, even railroad ties in some places. It's a strong wood. It's resistant to rot and to insects and to scratches. But when you look at it, it's going to be hard to plane a long board out of this tree, isn't it? There's not a huge, thick trunk that's real straight. You're going to have to do a lot of work to turn this into something special. But God didn't seem to mind because this table was worth it. This table that God has the Israelites make, it's plated with gold. And when you think about a table completely covered in gold, you think, man, that's got to be something. But that's not actually the expensive part of this piece of furniture. The Bible tells us that it is covered in three separate things. It is covered just like the Ark of the Covenant was, in a cloth of blue, a cloth of scarlet, and a goat skin. If you know anything about the ancient world and textiles, you'll know that that scarlet dye and that blue dye were among the most expensive and valuable materials on the surface of the planet, more so even than gold. So it's possible that the three coverings of this thing were worth more than the gold on it itself. This table is a big deal. And this table existed not to accumulate junk like my bedside table accumulates. It existed to hold exactly 12 things. 12 pieces of bread, representing the 12 tribes of Israel that were in the presence of God. And the Levites would come in every Sabbath in 2 stacks of bread and replace these 12 with fresh bread each Sabbath, each special day. Now, maybe this doesn't sound all that interesting to you because I just went off on a rant about what something was made of and how expensive it was. That's really what you come to church for, to learn about Old Testament furniture. But stick with me for a minute because I think there's something here. A whole lot of cultures have had some idea that at an altar you share bread and wine with God. You offer him something, you perhaps feed him. So in one sense, what you see at this bread is really common in the ancient world, but it's really different in some key ways I want to tell you too. Unlike most ancient cultures, there's not a picture of God at this table. There's not a statue of him. Why not? Well, there's a couple of reasons. There are, those 10 commandments. You make it through the first 2 or 3, and he says, don't do that. But that's not all. The reason you don't need a picture of God at this table is because you believe that God was at the table. You don't need a picture of me at the table if I'm eating with you. How many of you have been to Plantation Restaurant? Anybody? Okay, so you like sad buffets. That's good to know. I'll keep that in mind. But when you go in Plantation, there is a table that is dedicated to fallen soldiers. Have you ever seen that table? They always keep a plate set, a glass, silverware. I think they have boots next to it, and they have an American flag and a photograph. The reason they have the photograph is because the soldier isn't here to eat in that place. So this table in the Old Testament, it's similar, but it's really different. There's not a photograph because the soldier isn't missing. God isn't missing. This is the table of the presence of God. You don't need the picture because we believe God is here. That's not the only thing that's different about this table from most of these stories. In most of the ancient Near East cultures, you would serve your God a meal at this table. That's the exact opposite of what the Israelites do. Leviticus 24 says that the priests and Levites are the one who eat this meal. This meal was not a meal for God. It was a meal with God. And that's a big difference. Again, in the ancient world, all of these gods have stories about how the people need to feed them to keep them happy. Their gods are just like my wife. If you don't feed her, she's very angry and her wrath might fall upon you. But for the Israelites, it's a different story entirely. There's even this playful psalm in Psalm 50. God says to the people, if I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, because the world and all its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls? Do I drink their blood? No. I don't want your food. I want your hearts. I want your thanksgiving. So this table of the presence of God is special. It's a meal shared with God. Wow, this is unusual. I think God's favorite piece of furniture might be a table. Are you with me yet? Do you think I'm right about this? Because I think I'm right about this. I don't think it was a cross. He didn't like to look at the cross. We sing the Father turned his face away. The manger was pretty cool, man, but it gets like one verse. I think the table might be his favorite piece. And when I start to read the New Testament, I see this image comes forward, and it shows up a lot too. After all, have you ever noticed just how much of Jesus' teaching and ministry took place around food? Have you noticed that? What was the first miracle Jesus performed? He turned water into wine. And where was he at? He was at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. That's how he introduced himself to humanity as the emissary of God at a wedding party. Do you remember when Jesus met Levi or Matthew? We get two names sometimes. That's why we have trouble with name tag Sunday, I guess. But in Luke 5:27, Levi is working at the tax booth, and Jesus says, "Come follow me." And in the very next verse, you know what Jesus is doing? Lunch with Levi. He's at Levi's house, and it confuses everybody. But the first thing Jesus does with a person after he says, "Come follow me," is says, "Where can we go get lunch?" Seriously. Luke 5, verse 27, again in Luke chapter 7, this time it's at a Pharisee's house. It's the backdrop of the story where that woman comes in and she breaks that really expensive jar of ointment on the feet of Jesus. You remember, she weeps over his feet. She washes his feet with her hair. It's a cool story. Jesus is at table with someone. Do you remember a Bible story about a wee little man? A wee little man was he. He climbed up in that sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. Okay, I don't remember any of the rest of the song, so you're safe. Right, when Jesus called him to come down, do you remember where Jesus and Zacchaeus went? "I'm going to your house today." I thought you were going to say Carl's Perfect Pig, but it hadn't opened yet. They went to the table together. There's more. You remember those times when Jesus fed the thousands? The 5,000, the 4,000, the countless thousands. You remember all of those stories? He did it more than once. It's really cool, isn't it? All of those times when Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish and made these miracles. Why that? Or what about all of those parables that Jesus told that had something to do with a feast or a banquet and who was there and what they were doing there? Have you noticed that this seems to be a favorite thing of his? What about the rest of the stories where Jesus eats with his disciples and teaches with his disciples? Or the most famous of all of them, the Last Supper in the upper room. Aren't you glad that they all sat on one side of the table so we could get a good picture of that day? But Jesus prioritizes this moment. In fact, in Luke's gospel, Jesus says to his disciples, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you." It's funny, that little word, earnestly desired, is actually the word that we translate lust in every other context except this one. Jesus really, really wanted to have one last time where things were normal and things were safe and things were good with his disciples before he went off to the cross. And where did he want that moment? Not in a hot tub, not at a couch, but at a table. Isn't that something? After the resurrection, Jesus ate with 2 men. You remember he walked down the road with Emmaus, and he's talking to them about what's happened, and they look at him and they say, "Are you the only one who's been living in a rock? Haven't you heard? We thought the Messiah was here, but I guess not. We don't know what to do with this." And they talk, and they talk, and they talk, and I love Luke 24. When he was at table with them, Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. Their eyes were opened. When did Jesus reveal himself? Not through lecture, not through argument, but at table. I really think God's favorite piece of furniture is a table. I believe it. Look what happens. I guess I could tell you one more in Revelation 19. The culmination of humanity's good news in the gospel is that we get to share in the marriage supper of the Lamb with Jesus. That's the Bible picture of heaven, by the way. Having a good dinner together. That's something. But you know, I've told you Old Testament, and I told you New Testament. But I could just talk to you about your life for a second. What do you do when you want to celebrate something? 9 times out of 10, you do this same thing. When you get your first apartment out of college and you're poor and your furniture's made out of cardboard, you know what you're going to have somewhere in that mess? A card table. Somewhere that you can eat your food. When your kids' soccer season is over and you want to celebrate, what do? You share some junk food together to celebrate, don't you? When Leslie finished her doctorate, I'll never forget one of the best steaks I've ever eaten with Keith and Donna Oliver. We celebrated that milestone over a meal. It's a good thing. You know, the biggest part of a wedding is not the part where people vow in the presence of God and man to be faithful till death do us part. No, the biggest part of a wedding is the reception, the party, where people celebrate together. And even in the grief of a funeral, a lot of people tell me the most important moment wasn't when they lowered the casket into the grave. It was when we met in a smelly church fellowship hall somewhere and ate some fried chicken and laughed and cried together. I believe that your favorite piece of furniture is a table too. Now, what are you doing with this sermon? I've been asking myself that question for 7 minutes now, and I knew you'd finally get on board with me. What's the point of this? What week is this? Thanksgiving. Wow, you guys are either really asleep or really having trouble with your calendars. This is Thanksgiving week, isn't it? So what are you going to do on Thursday? Okay, maybe Wednesday, maybe Friday. You are going to gather with your family and friends, and where are you going to do it? The table. Now, in the middle of that table, there's going to be a turkey. There's going to be mashed potatoes. There's going to be green beans. There can be rolls. Some of you people have Italian for Thanksgiving, and I think that might be really what the Lord likes, but that's another sermon for another Sunday. You know, you might watch the Macy's parade. You might watch some football games. Maybe you look at Black Friday specials. But the thing in the American idea of Thanksgiving that makes Thanksgiving Thanksgiving is table time. Okay? What am I trying to do this morning? I want to tell you that what you do on Thursday is linked to what you do on Sunday. I want to connect what we're about to do as a church with what you're about to do as a family. There are a lot of things that we have called communion over the years. There's a lot of names for it, right? Communion reminds us that we are communing. We have community at communion. We've called it the Lord's Supper because our Lord Jesus ate this as his last meal. Sometimes we call it Holy Communion or the breaking of bread because of what Jesus did. The early church often called it the agape feast, the love celebration. We've called it the Lord's table a lot in our fellowship. But one of my favorite names for communion dates back to about the year 90 AD, and it became one of the apostles and their descendants' favorite terms for what we did. It's a little Greek word. I know we don't use a lot of Greek in Middle Tennessee. We're too busy ordering gyros instead of gyros. But the idea is this little word called Eucharist. Do you know what Eucharist means? Some of you are like, that's a Catholic word. No, it's a Greek word. They had it long before the Catholics ever did. Do you know what it means? When they came together as a church and they wanted to describe the thing that we're about to do with bread and wine, they used that word. That word is just the word Thanksgiving. This week, when you come to church on Sunday, you are taking Thanksgiving dinner. This week on Thursday, when you are communing with your family around a table which belongs to the Lord, you hear what I'm saying? You're taking communion? I know that's different than the way we've thought about it, but if we link these ideas, we might do something good. You know, on church on Sunday, we come and we have a miniature Thanksgiving dinner. Does that change how you think of communion? Because when I think of communion, I generally think of this solemn, somber, individual moment. It's me and God. And when I think of Thanksgiving with my family, I think about, what's Aunt Tracy going to say today? I think about, who's bringing the bread? What are we going to have for lunch? I think about all of those things, and it's a different thing. But actually, both things are kind of the same thing. God has always liked to gather his people around a table so that they could celebrate that for which they were thankful. What are you thankful for? I could tell you the things you'd expect. I can talk about my kids. I could talk about my faith. I could talk about this church and the cool stuff you do every day. I could talk about little things too. I could talk about the fact that it was 32 degrees this morning, so a whole lot of wasps died, and that makes me thankful. I could be thankful for Dr. Pepper in perfect motorcycle weather. I could be thankful for reruns on TV. I could be thankful for the freedoms we enjoy in this country. I can be thankful for deep things. I can be thankful for little things because the Bible says, give thanks for all things. Isn't that something? Even bathroom exhaust fans. So, communion, Thanksgiving, communion. My friend John Mark wrote about 3 perspectives we might have while we take communion. And I want you to think about these both in terms of what we do as a church and what you do as a family. He said, when we take communion, we might think about this. What's on the table? On Thursday, there's going to be a turkey on your table, right? If you do the traditional thing. That's kind of a big deal. In fact, even each year in the political scene, there's usually a moment where the president pardons a turkey. I've always thought that moment is really funny because if we're going to be honest, there ought to be a moment where he condemns the other 300 million turkeys because that's what seems to have happened. There is this moment where we recognize the meal we eat comes to us through sacrifice. This morning, as you take communion, I want to remind you that Jesus is on the table. He is the sacrifice that sustains us. In some sense, we are partaking of him as we commune. I don't think we think about that enough. It's in John 6, it's John 8. Jesus said, unless you eat my body and drink my flesh, my blood, you'll have no part of me. Jesus said, I am the bread of life that sustains you. In some sense, when we commune, we realize that the reason we commune is because Jesus is here on this table for us. Second, Jesus is not just on the table, he is at the table. He is around the table with us. I've heard a lot of preachers preach sermons like, wouldn't you live your life different if you could see Jesus was right next to you? Guess what? In communion, he is. He absolutely is. In Matthew 26:29 at the Last Supper, he promised that he would not eat this meal until he ate it anew in the kingdom of God with us. I believe that when I take communion, Jesus partakes with me. And by the way, on Thursday, when I have my Thanksgiving turkey, I remember that Jesus said, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. I believe that Jesus joins me for Thanksgiving meal too. Isn't that something? It's not just your crazy uncle who's come into Thanksgiving. It's Jesus too. Isn't that special? He joins us here. He breaks the bread. The Lord who pours the cup is risen from the dead. The one we love the most is now our gracious host. Come take the bread. Come drink the wine. Come share the Lord. Jesus is on the table. Jesus is beside us at the table. And then Jesus is the one who serves the table. What, the maker of the universe, the one who created everything that ever has been made, he's the one who serves? Yeah. You remember when he washed the feet of the disciples? You remember when he broke the bread? You remember when he told them where to find the room, when to start, when he prayed, when he did all of those things? As we take communion, I want you to remember that Jesus is serving us this meal. And I want you to think about that as you serve each other this meal at Thanksgiving. Isn't it funny how connected Thanksgiving and communion are? Why do I do all this? I want you to think of Thanksgiving as you take this communion meal. A lot of you have taken this meal hundreds, thousands of times in your life. I want you to take it like it's Thanksgiving dinner. I want you to savor it and take it with your family. I'm not asking you to add pumpkin pie to the Lord's Supper. I'm asking you to add gratitude. And the second thing is I want you to think of this communion on Thursday. And remember the presence and the reality of Jesus when you're sitting amongst family and friends. And the last thing I want to tell you is, if you're not sure where to have Thanksgiving this year, maybe there's an empty spot at your table. Maybe you're not sure where you fit in. I just want you to hear this. Jesus always has a seat for you at his table. On Sunday and on Thursday both. Here's your invitation to his table. Let's stand and sing.